Today we're going to start a new series on this channel and explore what I think is the most powerful way to be unique in music, working on your sound. And we'll do it in collaboration with my company Sonora Cinematic. We're going to imagine that I am the composer for a new TV series, let's say a Netflix one for example, and that I need to come up with a sonic palette for the whole season. Sounds that belong to a specific character, bread and butter tools, all that kind of stuff. It's going to take several days and several videos, and I'm hoping to put together a really cool sample library that we can release for free with Sonora Cinematic. And we're not going to make a silly freebie with leftover sounds. This is going to be an awesome, fully featured virtual instrument with a lot of deep sample instruments. Let's get started. So we can't do this without a story. I'm not a scriptwriter, so I've asked ChatGPT for some help in this department, trying to make what in the industry is known as a treatment, a document which basically works as a pitch to get the series made. Let me take a minute here. If you are concerned about the ethical and creative implications of using AI for doing this, I am too, and you'll find some extensive reflections on this topic on the blog article I wrote on the Sound Design Diaries that teased this series a few months ago, together with the full story of how I made this TV treatment. I'll link it in the description down below. Our series is going to be a mix of what The Guardian named the top 5 TV series at the time I came up with this idea. It has a clear British bias, and interestingly, I've only watched 3 of those. I'm going to leave the plot of the story and most of the characters for the next videos, but for now, here is the beginning of the synopsis for what the robot called Shifting Tides, as it provides important details about the world the series is based in.
Set in the booming financial landscape of 1980s Tokyo, Shifting Tides explores the lives of an international cast of ambitious characters competing for control, survival, and redemption in a world shaped by cultural collisions, power struggles, and personal sacrifices. At the center of it all is Emma Harlow, a British-Japanese woman with a shadowy past, who returns to Tokyo seeking answers about her late father's mysterious life, and finds herself embroiled in the cutthroat world of Shinsei Capital, a major financial institution.
So I asked to have some visual references for 1980s Tokyo during the economic boom. I particularly love the fact that ChatGPT kept going on about the exclusive whiskey bars of the capital, so I've asked for some visual references for those too. For now, I am focusing exclusively on the visual aesthetic of the world we're in. This is actually something that I do all the time, as it provides a great foundation to develop more stuff later on. I also generated some references for the headquarters of Shinsei Capital. This immediately gives me something to work with. Now I can start making some sounds. On a series like this, one type of sound I find easy to start with are electronic percussions and pulses. These are obviously an integral part of modern scores, and I just know that on a project like this stuff is going to be part of my sonic palette no matter what. It's literally going to be expected from me as a composer to have these type of sounds in my template. Of course, there are a ton of great sounding virtual instruments that are a great choice for something like this, but the whole point of this is, can we make something a little more bespoke and tailored to our story? I say we can, and we shall. I am very lucky to have a pretty good collection of synths and drum machines in the studio, so I'll use a couple of different ones. When I read the outline of the series, these two literally came to mind right away. I'm going to use the Arturia Drumbrute Impact. This is very much a no frills, great sounding drum machine, more or less in the style of a TR-909, but it definitely has its own thing going on. It's completely analog, and it has a wonderful distortion on the output that I definitely want to make the most of to give it a little character. Plus, I have it in the 1984 limited edition, which is just the enclosure's finish, but it will help me summon the 80s vibe, and I'm only half joking. And second, I'm going to use my Elektron Syntakt. Now, this is very much a modern hybrid digital analog groove box and drum machine. It has some very powerful synthesis capabilities which I want to use. One of the perks of this synth is also that it comes with the notoriously powerful Elektron sequencer, which offers all sort of great randomization options. So one thing I definitely want to do with this is to make sure I record some loops inspired by the Elektron sequencer. So In many ways, this is very much the opposite of the Drumbrute, and I see these two as a way to blend what is more or less a sound of the 80s with something much more edgy and modern. A nice thing about these two drum machines is that they both have USB inputs, which means I can sync them to my DAW with a simple cable, which will make editing samples for Kontakt much easier. I'll show you how I typically edit samples later in the video. Okay, I recorded a lot of stuff. Now I'm going to do a lot of editing, which is something I will most certainly spare you. It's probably interesting to know though that when I edit directly in Nuendo, I say this because we often use Reaper as Sonora Cinematic, I use cycle markers as they can be used as a token during export, making batch exporting and batch naming much easier. I synthesize all of these sounds completely from scratch with analog synths, but I still want to give them that powerful, cinematic, unique quality, so I'm going to process them a lot, both in and out of the box. For me, this is one of the most fun parts of the process. This part is often very much about experimenting, and you don't want to see me spending 15 hours at the modular or rewinding the cassette tape I passed samples on. But we can certainly have a look at some of the sounds that I made so far. I put this into temporary Kontakt instruments, both to try and see how playable they are, but also to start experimenting with some of the processing we can actually do in Kontakt. I want to show you a couple of things that I think are particularly useful to know if you want to try and do this yourself. One of the sounds I am particularly happy with is this very beefy bass line. I sampled it pitch by pitch and 90 BPM in two different variants. This one and this one. So as nice as they sound, and you saw that they loop perfectly, I know that when I'm going to use them to compose, I'm gonna have a very hard time to close musical phrases with them because they keep looping. So I either fade them out or I don't really have a way to stop the loop. So to make my life easier, I also sample them in a single shot, which I have over here. And this one. They're slightly different, but they match perfectly the sound of the loop, so I can use them as a final single shot to close a musical phrase. So let me show you how I built the Kontakt instrument. I'm gonna go on classic view so that I can easily look at the back end of the instrument. So you see that here in group 1, I simply have all the loops sampled pitch by pitch. And here you see that I have the group set to Time Machine Pro and the speed set to zone. This is important because it means that since this is set to a grid of 90 BPM, if I now change my session tempo and I put it to say 80, this is gonna stay on time. Gonna stretch the loop and stay perfectly on time, but I kept it to 90 because I think that a lot of the music for this TV series is gonna be in that kind of ballpark tempo. Actually a tempo that I kind of work a lot with, between 85, 90, 95, that kind of middle ground. And in the empty groups you see that here I have all the single shots for this particular session. And what you can do is kind of a nice option to have is to set these as release triggers. If I do this, if I set the second group to release trigger, rather than playing every time that I press the key, this group is going to play back when I release the key. Let's play in G. Now, if I release it, You see that if I time it perfectly, it's going to play a single shot that syncs perfectly with the tempo at the end of the phrase. Another thing I have here that I am quite happy with are these detuned saw waves that come from the bass line. These are really heavily processed. They really change the sound quite a lot with big sounding compressors and EQs, things like that. And here I set up a crossfade. Which you'll see I am controlling with the mod wheel. And to do this, I basically set up 3 groups, and they are actually 9 because I sampled each sound in 3 different round robins. And each sample has the filter more or less closed, it has more or less distortion. They're kind of sampled to naturally evolve. And now you'll see that if I go to the envelopes over here, I have this MIDI CC1, which is basically the mod wheel, set to control the crossfade. And you see that the first group looks like this, and the second one is really playing when the mod wheel is more or less half the way of its entire range, and the final one, so it kind of crossfades between the 3 of them. It's kind of really cool and powerful. And then I really sampled a lot more stuff. I have these really cool, very raw analog kicks. Again, they're quite processed though, so they're not quite raw, but they sound very beefy to start with from the Drumbrute. Sounds very good down here. And also this one is kind of interesting. Or even these hats, which I use some heavy glitching processing on. I have a lot of samples, already 500, 600 samples, something like that. And in the next days, I'm going to work on other synths, on strings, on brass, on some guitars. I have a lot of ideas that I absolutely can't wait to share with you. At Sonora Cinematic, we make virtual instruments, and I started it at the end of 2020 as an extension of what I was already doing on a day-to-day basis, making custom sample libraries. I started doing it for my own scoring work, and pretty quickly I got asked to do it for other composers as well. I was lucky enough to have contributed musical sound design for internationally released feature films, TV series, video game franchises, and at that point I said maybe there's a way to make this a little more scalable and offer my work to a broader audience, and Sonora Cinematic was born. The point of this is my shortcut to being creative has always been making sound, and I hope with this series I can transmit to you some of that passion for sound design. I'm really excited about making this instrument on camera. If you've enjoyed this, you'll probably like my video about making cinematic sound effects completely from scratch with Current. Take a look here. But most importantly, which sound should we focus on next? Let me know in the comments. See you next time, and thank you so much for watching.